Welcome to Real Scoop Live, a show for pool chemistry enthusiasts where we talk about all the coolest chemistry stuff you never knew you wanted to know. Any chemical advice or suggestions are opinion and utilized at the discretion of each individual pool operator. With that out of the way, let's start the show.
You walk along that street, talking nervously. You closer, won't be long now. You made me write this song, yeah. You say but don't know how.
All right. Welcome back to the Real Scoop Live. This is episode 2. I'm sorry, no, it's season 2, episode 10, which is the final episode of the season.
Full disclaimer here, Stacey is heavily medicated on
Heavily, yes.
remedies today.
I have not taken up smoking. I just have a little bit of a respiratory infection going on. So yeah, it's all good. But today,
well, Stacey, it's sultry.
Is it? Even when I sniffle?
Yeah, it's okay.
So today the guys are going to talk to you about environmental impacts. So take it away.
What kind of environment you talking about?
I'm guessing a pool or spa environment.
Pool or spa environment, and maybe another kind of environment. So we're going to jump into these pretty quick here today because this is something that it's really kind of more of a conversation starter, and we want to keep this brief because we want people thinking about it more afterwards. So pool environment or spa environment and different products, chemical examples. So we're going to go over a couple different things of how chemicals can specifically impact your pool environment, and then environmental impacts on a different kind of environment, and really how pool and spa chemicals can impact those as well. So we're going to jump right into this one.
I just want to make sure that everyone realizes that we are, although we're not necessarily like tree huggers or environmentalists, you don't go out of your way to harm the environment, right? So when we talk about this, we're not only talking about the pool environment, but how on a bigger scale, the environmental impact of pools are. And so we may not go down the rabbit hole like we normally do, but this should be a conversation starter. Just like Brett said,
nobody's out to actively destroy the environment.
No,
not that I've met. I'm sure there's at least one person, but in general, we've got one. We should try and take care of it, just like anything.
Yeah.
So,
and in the last episode, if you didn't watch it, we talked about spas, and we talked about make sure that you need to drain the spa before you actually drain it, because again, even though it's only 350 or 400 gallons, you still have to worry. It's the same thing with pools. You don't want to just throw away 15,000 gallons of water or 20,000 gallons of water or even 400 gallons of water if you don't have to, right? So that's one of those things, as we go around, if you're watching the news and all the other stuff, whether you're a conspiracy theorist or just up on things going on, or if you're an environmentalist, we don't want to waste things. We don't want to harm the environment. So especially with the way that water is nowadays, with the commodity issue with it, and it's harder to get, especially if you're in the Western United States or even in Central Texas. We were going through a drought, and I think we still are technically in a drought. But when you go 5 months without a drop of rain, that water becomes much more important. So, and it's not just that, it's, water's important anyway. I mean, we need it to live. So when we're talking about this, let's start off with the pool environment. There's different, each chemical added has additional side effects, whether it be pH or alkalinity or even total hardness, which can be not necessarily just calcium. There's other hard minerals and metals that get in the water. But water balance has a big impact on your pool environment, a huge impact on your pool environment. Stabilizer does too, dissolved solids, all that stuff. Even salinity. When you're talking about salt pools, think about if you've ever been up north and when they use salt on the roads and what it does to metals and the environmental impact on that. I don't know how far we want to get into this with backwashing salt pools and what it does to the environment.
Let's save that for the end.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we did, a lot of this is actually from an existing training that we did earlier in the year. So there's a lot of information, a lot more information that we've got available on this. So if it's something you're interested in, on the next couple slides we're going to go over, reach out, let us know, because we're happy to share that information, just because it's good to have. There's actually been a number of dealers that have printed this out and bound it in something that they keep as a reference for their customer service people, just for good rule of thumb, hey, check the book to make sure we're not going to have a weird reaction here. So we only took about 4 or 5 common pool chemicals, and we're going to look at the different impacts that each one of those chemicals have on the different aspects of water balance. Just to show you, when you add one thing, it's not just going to change one factor. It's going to affect pretty much everything across the board. So we're going to jump right into trichlor. Oh my goodness, trichlor. I feel like trichlor's got kicked around the last couple of years, but
It has.
it's still very popular. It's very relevant because tons of people use it, and so we need to know a lot about it. Generally, it comes in tablet form or granular. The granular form, it's kind of regional, really. It's granular, more of a powdered form, and it's used as a shock or an algicide in certain areas.
More like the Southwest.
Yeah.
Southwest and South Cali. Yeah.
You don't see it too often in the Midwest.
No.
Physical,
Or even in the Southeast or the Northeast. It's really mostly Southwest and Southern California.
So the pH of trichlor is pretty darn low. So around, let's say around 3-ish. So it's going to lower the pH of the pool water. So what does that mean for us, Matt? If we're trying to maintain water balance and we've got something that we're adding pretty consistently every day and it's lowering the pH, what are we going to have to do to offset that?
Well, you're going to have to add alkalinity increaser or pH increaser or aerate the
Or
water.
both.
Yeah.
So
For sure.
that's one thing that we're going to have to do to counter an unintended effect to the environment of the pool just from adding trichlor. Oh my goodness, look at that. The alkalinity, the pH, because it's so acidic, actually lowers the total alkalinity as well. So now we're going to have to add some alkalinity increaser. Stabilizer, about a third of the weight of a trichlor tab typically is cyanuric acid. So as you're adding your sanitizer regularly, you're regularly adding stabilizer. If you've done any of these other Real Scoop Lives or any other chemical trainings that we've talked about, you hit a point of diminishing returns with stabilizer where you've got enough. Any more isn't going to get you more benefit. It'll actually be a detriment to the effectiveness of the chlorine that you have in the water. So you could have a good solid reading of chlorine in the water, but the cyanuric acid is so high that it's killing the effectiveness, rendering it almost useless.
And what is that number?
Generally, it's going down every year, it seems, but generally you don't need to be any higher 30 to 50 parts per million. And even at 30 or to 50, it cuts into the effectiveness of your chlorine, and you might have to adjust how much you're adding to make sure you have enough sanitizer in there to do what you need it to.
So we have a Real Scoop Live that we talked, I think it's just all about cyanuric acid. So if you really want to go down that rabbit hole, look on our YouTube channel, look for the cyanuric acid episode. But I'll tell you that typically anything over 55 is a detriment. And most of the time you want to be between 30 and 50. If you're a commercial pool and you're above 15, if you have a defecation episode, technically you're supposed to drain the water out because the cyanuric acid keeps the chlorine from doing what it needs to oxidize or sanitize that Hershey squirt. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's a big deal, and it's not even considering that stabilizer also affects the alkalinity. So a third of your stabilizer reading should actually be subtracted from your total alkalinity so that you have a carbonic alkalinity, and the carbonic alkalinity is what protects the pH. So using chlorine is great, and it used to be a lot less expensive than it is now, but it's still traditionally the thing that people use to sanitize the water. And so because of that, you have all these other impacts, right? It's not only an impact on the pH, it's an impact on the alkalinity, but it's also an impact on the cyanuric acid, which again has an impact on the alkalinity and the pH.
And over the last couple of years, people were dabbling in different types of chlorine that they'd never played with before. So if you were in a market that was heavily trichlor and people all of a sudden start using liquid chlorine, the type of changes that we're going to go over here are almost entirely different. So the types of things that you need to have on your route truck or your service techs need to have to counter these changes is also going to be completely different. So that was some problems that people were running into the last couple of years with shortages of different kinds, because not only could they not get the chlorine that they were used to using, they had to shift their whole way of thinking to counter the other side effects that were happening in the pool environment. So we mentioned liquid because people were using liquid because it was a little bit more readily available than trichlor, the pH
it's really
pretty
around
high.
13. It's around 13, but it also depends on what kind of concentration. Yeah. What's the strength is.
So the pH of liquid chlorine is a heck of a lot higher. So whereas with trichlor, you were adding soda ash to bring your pH back up, or aerating to bring your pH back up. Now your pH is going to trend higher. So you might actually have to keep acid on the truck to counter that. Now, generally not a big deal because you're probably going to have some on the truck anyway, but the volume that you had might have had to change.
But also, I mean, and this isn't necessarily environmental, but the cost of muriatic acid has gone through the roof compared to a year or 2 or 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, again, when you're talking about trichlor going up, acid going up, then, liquid chlorine has gone up 2 or 3 times this year, if not more. I think it was going up about once a month or so. It seemed like for a while, but
in terms of alkalinity, your liquid chlorine isn't going to impact that much on there, so fairly neutral. So that's one win that you get for using liquid over trichlor, because you aren't going to have to consistently add bicarb to bring your alkalinity back in range, because it's not going to affect it that much. Stabilizer, there's no stabilizer, so you're not going to keep adding stabilizer to the water, which is a huge benefit, because if you hit that magic number where we said if you're in that 30 to 50 range, you can just hang out there, which is great. You're not adding more, you're not making your chlorine less effective. Calcium, there's no calcium. Awesome. There is salt in it though, because sodium hypochlorite, that's just salt, baby. So every gallon of liquid chlorine you're adding a pound of salt. So if you've got a pool that's traditionally been treated with chlorine, liquid chlorine, and it's converting over to salt, check the salinity before you add any granular salt to the water, because you probably have a pretty good salinity reading just off the bat, because you've been adding so much over the years.
And so here's a news flash based on what you just said. For all those people that don't know it, salt pools generate sodium hypochlorite. So when you have a salt pool and you have the cell over in with your equipment, it's a salt pool, but that is generating sodium hypochlorite, right? It's making chlorine.
You got a liquid chlorine factory.
So there's a lot of people that think, well, I'm on salt. I have a salt pool because I'm allergic to chlorine, when they don't realize that they're not really allergic to chlorine. What they're allergic to is chloramines, which is the smell you get or the byproduct of used chlorine, which is toxic. So,
and in general, water balance, because it makes the pH raise in the pool water, it's going to tend to add to scale forming aspects of the water. It's pretty popular. People use a lot of liquid, especially in commercial facilities, because it's easy to handle, inject, dose. It's just kind of different than trichlor. So dichlor is a little different. We left that one off, but we've got slides available for that. If you're interested in that one, just reach out. We can send that over. So we talked a little bit about pH correction. Well, what else is changing when we're using common pH correcting chemicals?
Oh, the alkalinity. The alkalinity goes up as well.
Mm-hmm.
So there is an alkalinity reading or an alkalinity rating of soda ash, and I think
it's minimal.
It's minimal,
but it does add to it.
But it does add to it. So, and that's the thing too about soda ash and bicarb, is that the pH of soda ash is 11.5, the pH of bicarb is 8.2. So the thing about using bicarb is that even if you overdose it, your pH should never really go over 8.2, where with soda ash, if you overdose it, then your pH could literally go up to 11, right? So depending on what you need, make sure that you're using the product that you need, because although the soda ash doesn't have any stabilizer or calcium or a really salt, soda ash or sodium bicarb. Okay. So bicarb does have salt in it, but soda ash does not. The water balance it raises makes scale forming. So if you overdose it, especially like in a spa, or if someone thinks that they need instead of putting in ounces, they put in pounds on accident. You're gonna have to make sure to counterbalance that, right? Because here's the thing about. So when you have a high pH, that not only makes your water more scale forming, but it also tends to be hazy, and it also makes your chlorine effectiveness go way down. So right around 7.8. The chlorine, instead of making hypochlorous acid, makes hypochlorite ions. So the higher it goes past 7.8, the more the chlorine becomes a byproduct instead of what you really want. So if you're shocking a pool and your pH is at 8, you're literally getting about 10% of that shock that's actually doing anything. And if that's the case, then you're not reaching breakpoint chlorination. So you can see how it's kind of like a symbiotic relationship. The water balance is so important to how everything else works.
So off that point, Matt, let's go back to liquid here. So say you had a pool that had an algae outbreak and you've been treating the pool with liquid, but you haven't been keeping your pH in check. So if your pH is at 8.5 and you're just dumping more and more liquid in there, you're wasting your money. You're wasting money. Boatload to get the result you're looking for if you're not keeping the pH in check.
Right.
Everything impacts everything else. And it's when you learn these little connections that you really become efficient at troubleshooting and trying to figure out what these problems are, because you're thinking like a carpenter who makes stairs, always one step ahead.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah, it's muriatic acid. This is kind of a fun one. It's a clear liquid, very low pH, takes down total alkalinity, doesn't affect a lot of other things, but water balance, it can make really aggressive. Now, this is, it's heavier than water, so if you add it in without diluting it, it can sink down to the bottom and etch surfaces or do work on pool liners or anything like that. It does multiple things. It takes your pH down. It also takes your total alkalinity down. So if your total alkalinity is good and you're just trying to correct your pH, you might be affecting your alkalinity at the same time. So that one's kind of a fun one. There's actually a chart that Matt had at one point that was like, if your alkalinity is high, but your pH is low and your alkalinity, and it went through all the different variations of how you should do it, dosing off of certain criteria. Mm-hmm. That's a good one. I think we've put that in different trainings we've done before.
We have that available in case you're interested.
That's available if you want it, because you can add different quantities of different products to help resolve the issue without making additional problems. At least as not as pronounced problems as what you're typically going to get if you just drop an acid bomb in the pool.
You don't want to be dropping acid.
No.
It's terrible.
And cyanuric acid. We talked a little bit about cyanuric acid. Actually, mostly about this already, but this is elemental. So if you're adding it directly to get your stabilizer reading to a certain point, it's granular. It has a lower pH because acid. Hey, there it is. We can drop it with the acid. Total alkalinity. It'll actually lower the total alkalinity because it's acidic, but when the cyanuric acid level is high enough, it actually shows artificially inflated alkalinity readings. Generally, if you're at 60 or 70 parts per million, take that amount of cyanuric acid, divide it by 3, and subtract that from your alkalinity to get your adjusted alkalinity. We've talked about that in other sections as well, and there's tons of information out on there. If we ever say anything you want more information on, shoot us an email. We probably have some information we can send to you rapidly. Stabilizer.
And that's the big problem, because you're saying stabilizer between 60 and 70, and odds are if someone is taking care of their own pool that they have a cyanuric acid level of 100 or higher, right? So typically when you're at 60 or 70, it doesn't really make that much of an impact on your alkalinity. Because remember, we were talking earlier about total alkalinity and carbonic alkalinity, and carbonic's actually the one that you want. But the problem is that it's very hard to test for cyanuric acid above 100. And most of the time you can look at it like one of those, the Pool Master, little thing that goes up and down, you can test that. But remember that when you're looking at 100, every pencil line past 100 is another 100. And sometimes you can get high stabilizer tests. That's true as well. Yep. But if you're looking at 100 to 200 to 300, well, essentially you're looking at an alkalinity where you think is balanced, but it's actually 0.
Right.
And you're wondering why your pH is bouncing all around and why the water is aggressive and why it makes people itch and stuff like that. And it's all really about having that high cyanuric acid level. And unfortunately, there's really no way to get it out. There are products out there that will tell you, okay, if you jump through 18 hoops or 10 hoops and you do it exactly right, and the moon's in phase and you stand on one foot, then you can probably lower your alkalinity. But for the most part, the best way to get rid of it is to drain some water out.
I think he meant lower your cyanuric acid.
That's what I meant.
Cyanuric
acid. Sorry. Thanks for having my back there, Brett.
Oh, just making sure.
Yeah.
No misinformation. And
no misinformation.
And this is the final slide where we kind of want people to think a little bit more about the types of products that they're using. Single-use plastics and things like that. through talking to different dealers and reps in different markets and whatnot, in about an area a third the size of Indiana, over 1 million single-use gallons of liquid chlorine were sold this last year. That's
single-use 1 gallon jugs.
That's a lot of trash. That's
Yeah.
also a lot of cardboard waste because they come in a box of 4.
Yeah.
There's different ways to do it. You could do bulk deliveries. You could buy 55-gallon drums and meter it out to reusable containers and things like that. I always know when I was winterizing pools, one of the biggest problems we had at the end of the season was, holy geez, we've got a whole mess of empty antifreeze bottles, and you can't leave them at the property because they've already stopped trash service or anything like that. So what do you do with them? We ended up taking them back and storing them in our warehouse and throwing them in a dumpster a load at a time. That was an inconvenience, but at the same time, that's a lot of trash.
That's kind of where we get into the environment part, right?
Yeah.
We're talking about products that you use in pools that can't be reused and they can't be recycled. So, or at least they're not supposed to be, right?
Right.
So now you can drive around to a pool store and odds are if they're doing service, that you'll see a dumpster full of single-use plastics that have to go into the landfill, right? And we already know that there's microplastics in
Everything.
the ocean and some of our food and in our not our fill water, but our tap water, all kinds of stuff, and it's only going to get worse. So, it's time to mitigate some of that stuff. If we can get off of those, and remember that Brett's only talking about a little extended past Metro Indianapolis, that there was 1 million 1 gallon jugs sold, and then that's sold the landfill.
Yeah.
And that's only through, that's not even through like Kroger and Home Depot and everything. That's just
through pool stores. Just pool stores.
And service companies, right?
Yeah.
So, and so if you think about that, and it's,
blows your hair back.
Indianapolis, well, then how much is being done in the Chicago metro area, Detroit, Minneapolis, Des Moines, St. Louis? So we're talking about millions and millions and millions of single-use plastics that are going into landfills. And that's one of the reasons why, well, I'm going to do it anyway. That's one of the reasons why I came out with OxySplash. OxySplash is a great oxidizing product, but you only need half a pound to oxidize 10,000 gallons. And so half a pound of OxySplash literally will do the exact same thing as far as oxidation as a gallon of liquid chlorine. So when you think about that, if you have a 25 pounder of OxySplash, that replaces 50 1 gallon jugs. So the environmental impact from that, just from single-use plastics, is huge.
Look at the concentration of the products you're using. If you can find more concentrated products that can get more done with less, that's adding less waste when you have to throw the packaging away to the overall hill. It's not eliminating it, but it's doing every little bit you can.
Sure.
So that's kind of what we were talking about. Matt, he had an interesting point last night when we were talking a little bit about this. Was it salt in? So I used to be in a previous life. I worked for a distribution company as their chemical specialist for 17 states and a whole country, and that whole country was Canada. And so during that time, now this is probably 12 to 14 years ago, the GTA had, and I was looking it up. I don't know if it ever went through, but they were talking about it, saying that you couldn't have salt pools anymore because of the impact of the backwashed or draining of the salt water, especially if they did it into the sewage system, because the salinity level of Lake Ontario and of their local rivers was getting so high that they were really worried about the environmental impact of all that salt, right? Because it's a freshwater lake, right? Freshwater rivers. And so they didn't want the freshwater lake to be a salt lake. We already have one of those, so we don't need another one. Yeah. So that was one of the things that they were looking at. And if you think about that, it's, on a macro level,
you have all these salt pools. I mean, a salt pool is the number one growing pool that's been out there for years now, because it's much easier to take care of, or not have to buy and dose with chlorine and all that stuff. But the environmental impact of having a salt pool is detrimental to everybody. Because remember, if you have salt water that you're spraying on your grass or putting into the preserve behind your house or whatever, you're actually adding salt that
isn't there
harms,
naturally.
It's not, and it harms grass, it harms trees. It can actually go into the aquifer and all that kind of stuff, which then again harms all kinds of stuff. So we're not just talking about environmental impacts of plastics, which is a huge thing that we all need to do better on, but also the water itself. If you're draining water and you have water that has high cyanuric acid, which isn't good for the environment, high salt, which isn't good for the environment, or salt at all, high chlorine, which isn't good for the environment. Those are all kinds of things that you have to consider before you decide I'm going to do A or B. Right?
There have been instances where facilities drained into sanitary sewers that had very, very high chlorine levels, and it actually destroyed the bacteria bed that they use to help break down at water treatment plants. Mm-hmm. Huge cost to fix that.
Yeah.
Be aware of what you're putting out there is kind of the main push of what we're talking about. So we hope we got some ideas across today.
Yeah. If you want to have more of a conversation about this, if you like the stuff that you heard, please just get in touch with us. You can call or text 877-274-7261. This is the conclusion of season 2 of the Real Scoop Live. We appreciate everybody who's watched, all the comments that we've gotten, all the texts that have come in. If you like, share, subscribe, all the other stuff that you would normally do with a YouTube channel. Obviously, it helps us get the word out. If you want to see some of the other episodes, or you can call or text us about any of the episodes. Right? It doesn't just have to be this one,
or ones you want to see,
because we love doing that. Now, stay tuned. Not stay tuned, but if you're interested, we do a seminar series in typically around the February timeframe. If you want to be part of that, we call it spring training. Just text us your interest, and we'll send you an invite once it's all set up. Okay. So with that, Stacey, you want to send us out?
Yes, sir. So we've talked about quite a few things in season 2. A few of the things that we've covered, if you've not been with us the whole time, we talked about how shock is a verb. We talked about some facts when it pertains to pools, and how there are some crazy notions out there about different things you can do and how those may or may not be such a good idea. So don't always follow Facebook advice. Kind of come to the experts for that. We talked about the magic pill, proactive versus reactive, the drain strain, old pool dogs, add-ons and alternatives, and biguanides.
There it is.
That is so hard to say. So even if you just watch that episode to get the pronunciation of that word down, it's a win. So in our season 9, we talked about
episode 9.
Season 9.
So episode 9.
Episode 9.
Again, I'm medicated. So anyway, that's how we're ending season 2. Who knows what's going to happen in season 9? So that's all we've got. If you guys have any questions, you have suggestions for upcoming episodes, you can call or text us. That number is scrolling at the bottom of your screen, 877-274-7261. And I think that's all we've got.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
All right. See you in season 3.
Bye.
Bye.
Now I can't wait for summertime. It won't be long when you come back. I love you like I do. Love you like I do.